What if the most daring war movies you ever saw were not fiction at all? What if the explosions, the rescues, and the impossible missions were pulled straight from the shadows of history? This is the secret world of Commando raid films. Some too real to believe, others completely made up yet told with chilling precision. Let's uncover 15 that actually happened and 4 that never did. Number 15. The Guns of Navarone, 1961. It was hailed as one of the greatest war epics of its time. The Guns of Navarone told the story of an Allied team sent to destroy massive German cannons on a fortified island in the Aegean Sea. Audiences believed it was pure fiction, but historians revealed it was inspired by several real commando missions carried out in the Greek islands during World War II. The movie was based loosely on British raids led by the Special Boat Service and Special Air Service. Operations like Anglo and Harling targeted coastal guns and bridges. Director J. Lee Thompson used those missions as the blueprint for the film's realism. Soldiers who had fought in the Aegean said the tension, the exhaustion, and the sense of doomed bravery felt exactly right. Behind the scenes, the production was brutal. Filming on rough terrain and roads nearly destroyed the crew. The actors climbed real cliffs under scorching sun while explosions went off dangerously close. Gregory Peck suffered multiple injuries but insisted on finishing every scene himself. The film became a sensation not only for its spectacle but for its emotional truth. Veterans wrote letters to the studio saying the movie captured the hopeless courage of men who knew they might never return. The British government even screened it for training officers. In its silence between gunfire, the film revealed what real raids always carried: fear and faith in equal measure. Number 14. Where Eagles Dare, 1968. At first glance, Where Eagles Dare looked like another outrageous World War II fantasy. A mountain fortress, a cable car fight, a secret mission deep in Bavaria. But its roots lay in the true stories of British commandos trained for winter sabotage missions in occupied Europe. Ian Fleming once hinted that the novel's author Alistair MacLean had drawn from classified reports of raids he could never name. The film followed Major Smith and Lieutenant Schaffer infiltrating a Nazi stronghold to rescue a captured general. The setting echoed the real Operation Freshman and Operation Gunnerside, both missions launched by British forces into snowbound Norway to sabotage heavy water plants and communications. Many of those men never returned their work, hidden for decades. The production embraced that realism. Richard Burton performed his own stunts dangling from freezing cables, while Clint Eastwood fired real weapons during live explosion sequences. MGM feared lawsuits after several accidents injured extras. The director, Brian G. Hutton, refused to soften the violence, claiming war could not be made polite. Critics were divided. Some called it pulp, others called it poetry. Soldiers who had fought in Norway said it looked terrifyingly authentic. Its legacy endures not because of its explosions, but because of its paranoia. You never know who to trust behind enemy lines. Number 13. The Heroes of Telemark, 1965. It was Norway again. Snow, wind, and a desperate mission to halt Nazi Germany's atomic ambitions. The Heroes of Telemark told of Norwegian resistance fighters who risked everything to sabotage the heavy water facility at Vemork. This one was not legend. It happened. The film dramatized Operation Gunnerside, the real mission that crippled the Nazi nuclear project. Starring Kirk Douglas and Richard Harris, it mixed Hollywood flair with chilling authenticity. The actual saboteurs served as consultants. They guided the actors through the frozen ravines where they once crawled under moonlight carrying explosives in silence. The controversy came when Douglas demanded more heroism on screen while the Norwegians wanted more truth. The studio clashed with local historians who accused them of glamorizing death. At one point, Norway nearly pulled its filming permits after locals protested the distortion of their national story. Behind-the-camera conditions were brutal. Crew members suffered frostbite and equipment froze in sub-zero temperatures. Yet those hardships gave the film its texture. Each breath of cold air felt earned. Critics in Britain praised it for showing how small groups of men altered the fate of nations. Today, veterans still point to The Heroes of Telemark as one of the few films that understood the meaning of sacrifice. It was not about killing Nazis. It was about keeping hope alive when the world had turned to ice. Number 12. The Dam Busters, 1955. It was the film that made war sound like music. The Dam Busters chronicled the true story of Operation Chastise, the Royal Air Force mission to destroy German dams using revolutionary bouncing bombs. When it premiered, audiences were stunned not just by its realism, but by its sense of precision and restraint. Every frame felt like a military briefing dressed as cinema. The film followed Wing Commander Guy Gibson and his elite No. 617 Squadron as they trained for an impossible task. They had to fly Lancaster bombers at night, barely skimming the water to release the weapon at the perfect angle. This was not imagination. These men really did it, and many never came back. Director Michael Anderson used official RAF footage and worked directly with the surviving airmen. The production was supervised by military engineers who had built the original bomb. Every flight path and explosion was reconstructed with mathematical detail. It was the closest cinema ever came to a real mission debrief, but controversy followed. The film used the squadron's dog name, an offensive racial term, which later led to public backlash. Historians argued over whether to censor it or preserve authenticity. The BBC even banned its broadcast for years. Yet beneath the noise, the film's spirit endured. When modern pilots see the Dam Busters, they see not propaganda, but perfectionism, the discipline, the anxiety, and the heartbreak that came with every mission. It remains a hymn to those who gambled their lives on science and steel. A true commando raid in the air. Number 11. The Dirty Dozen, 1967. It was bold, it was brutal, and it shocked audiences everywhere. The Dirty Dozen claimed to be fiction, but its foundation was chillingly real. It drew inspiration from wartime special units like the Demolition Section of the 101st Airborne and the so-called Filthy 13, a group of rebellious paratroopers trained for suicide raids before D-Day. The film followed 12 condemned men offered redemption through one impossible mission, infiltrating a French chateau and killing the Nazi officers inside. Director Robert Aldrich filled it with grit, mud, and madness. Lee Marvin, himself a World War II veteran, brought authority to every command. Production became its own war zone. Cast fights broke out constantly. Charles Bronson refused to speak to John Cassavetes after a brawl. Ernest Borgnine nearly quit over the cruelty of certain scenes. The studio demanded cuts after test audiences complained about the level of violence. Aldrich refused and threatened to walk. The controversy only made it stronger. Critics accused it of glorifying murder, while soldiers called it the most honest film about irregular warfare ever made. Behind the bravado, it explored something raw, the blurred line between order and chaos. When veterans of the Filthy 13 saw it, they recognized themselves instantly. The swagger, the disobedience, the silent loyalty under fire. They said it captured what real commando raids felt like. Loud, dirty, and meaningless until you found brotherhood in the ruins. Number 10. The Eagle Has Landed, 1976. This one turned the story upside down. A German commando raid on British soil. Based on Jack Higgins' novel, The Eagle Has Landed mixed fiction with startling reality. Historians later revealed that the plot mirrored real Nazi operations planned but never executed, including attempts to kidnap Churchill and sabotage infrastructure in wartime England. The film portrayed German paratroopers disguised as Polish soldiers landing in an English village to capture the Prime Minister. Michael Caine as Colonel Steiner played the mission with quiet dignity, not villainy. Director John Sturges shot it with such authenticity that some British audiences walked out claiming it humanized the enemy too much. The production was cursed with chaos. Richard Harris was fired after clashing with Sturges and replaced by Donald Sutherland at the last moment. Locals protested the use of Nazi uniforms during filming, especially in Oxfordshire, where wartime memories still bled through. The controversy nearly doomed it. British tabloids attacked the movie, calling it treacherous. But when it finally premiered, it found a strange kind of respect. Veterans of both sides admitted it was closer to reality than they wanted to believe. The legacy of The Eagle Has Landed lies in its moral complexity. Not every raid was noble. Not every soldier was a hero. Sometimes war's truest stories come from those who failed, yet refused to surrender their humanity. Number 9. Operation Daybreak, 1975. This was not Hollywood fiction. Operation Daybreak told one of the most daring and tragic commando missions of the Second World War, the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, the architect of the final solution. Filmed in Prague itself, it followed the Czech and Slovak agents parachuted from Britain to kill the man known as the Butcher of Prague. The story was true. The raid took place in May 1942 under the codename Operation Anthropoid. Two resistance fighters, Josef Gabčík and Jan Kubiš, ambushed Heydrich's car on a narrow street. Their grenades struck home and the Nazi official died days later. What followed was hell. The village of Litis was wiped out in revenge. Hundreds were executed. Director Louis Gilbert shot the film with a near-documentary eye. He used the same church where the real commandos made their last stand, surrounded by SS troops and running out of bullets. To honor the fallen, the Czech government allowed filming in restricted zones. Actors lived under surveillance, fearing they might be watched by secret police. The film's release stirred controversy. British critics found it too grim, while Czechoslovak authorities tried to suppress it for showing collaboration and betrayal. Yet survivors of the resistance called it sacred. It showed how courage could be both victorious and doomed. Today, Operation Daybreak stands as a cinematic gravestone, a reminder that not all raids ended in escape. Some were designed to die, and through that death, a nation remembered its dignity. Number 8. The Sea Wolves, 1980. The Sea Wolves blended espionage elegance and true naval daring. Starring Gregory Peck, Roger Moore, and David Niven, it depicted retired British officers secretly striking at German ships anchored in the neutral waters of Goa, India. The story seemed absurd, old men performing a clandestine raid, yet every detail was real. It was based on Operation Creek, a covert special operations executive and Indian resistance collaboration in 1943. Using disguised fishing boats, the raiders sank German merchant vessels, transmitting intelligence to U-boats. The British government kept it classified for decades because it violated neutral Portuguese territory. The movie captured that tension perfectly. Gregory Peck portrayed Colonel Calvert as weary yet determined. Roger Moore added charm masking danger with wit. The production filmed in actual Indian harbors, under military supervision. Locals thought it was fiction until veterans confirmed its authenticity. Behind the scenes, the film struggled with historical sensitivity. India had recently gained independence, and officials hesitated to permit shooting that glorified British heroism. Moore nearly quit when his scenes were censored by authorities. But the film survived the storms of politics and memory. Critics later dismissed it as old-fashioned, but veterans adored it. They said it showed the quieter bravery of those who fought in silence after their prime. The Sea Wolves was not about glory. It was about duty that refused to retire. Number 7. The Devil's Brigade, 1968. Before there was Band of Brothers, there was the Devil's Brigade. A rousing yet gritty depiction of the real 1st Special Service Force, a joint Canadian and American commando unit created to fight behind enemy lines in Italy. The film starred William Holden and Cliff Robertson and dramatized their transformation from misfits to elite warriors. Every raid, every skirmish, every moment of rivalry came from real accounts. The Devil's Brigade earned its name from German soldiers who feared them, calling them Black Devils after they painted their faces before night attacks. The production was blessed by authenticity but cursed by tension. Real veterans served as advisors and constantly corrected the script, infuriating the studio. Holden clashed with the director over tone, demanding less heroism and more humanity. The result was a film that felt alive and unpredictable. Critics loved its energy, but historians noticed something deeper. It captured the psychological transformation of men who had to unlearn civility to survive. The training scenes shot in harsh mountain weather were brutally real. The actors were forced to climb cliffs without harnesses under military supervision. When veterans saw it, they wept. It reminded them of fallen brothers and impossible victories. The film never became a blockbuster, but among soldiers it became legend. It told the truth that glory fades, but brotherhood endures. Number 6. Raid on Entebbe, 1977. This was the rare case of Hollywood catching history almost in real time. Raid on Entebbe recreated the daring Israeli commando operation that rescued more than 100 hostages from a hijacked Air France flight in Uganda in 1976. The real mission Operation Thunderbolt stunned the world for its precision and audacity. The movie followed within months, bringing that intensity straight to television screens. The film starred Charles Bronson, Peter Finch, and Yaphet Kotto portraying Ugandan dictator Idi Amin. It unfolded almost like a documentary, The Recreation of the Terminal. The C-130 landings and the firefight were near identical to the real mission. The production used actual military advisors and eyewitness accounts. But controversy came swiftly. Uganda denounced it as propaganda. Several countries banned its broadcast, fearing political fallout. Idi Amin himself publicly threatened the filmmakers, calling it an insult to African sovereignty. For a moment, international tensions echoed inside the film industry. Behind the camera, things were equally chaotic. The crew shot day and night to match the world news cycle. Actors memorized dialogue taken from live press conferences. It was filmmaking at the speed of truth. Raid on Entebbe was nominated for 9 Emmy Awards. Yet what made it unforgettable was its realism. The sound of boots on the tarmac, the sudden silence after the gunfire, the faces of the rescued passengers. It showed the world that heroism sometimes arrives disguised as necessity. It was not fiction. It was faith under fire. Number 5. The Bridge on the River Kwai, 1957. It won 7 Academy Awards. It was hailed as the greatest war movie ever made. Yet behind its grandeur lay a true story soaked in agony. The Bridge on the River Kwai was based on the ordeal of Allied prisoners forced by the Japanese to build a railway bridge through the Burmese jungle. While novelist Pierre Boulle fictionalized characters like Colonel Nicholson, the actual events of the Burma-Thailand Railway were brutally real. Tens of thousands of British, Australian, and Asian laborers died under inhuman conditions. The bridge existed, and so did the madness of pride and obedience that the film dissected. Director David Lean transformed horror into poetry. The whistling soldiers, the shining river, the slow descent into insanity. But survivors of the real railway were divided. Some praised the artistry. Others condemned it for romanticizing their torment. Veterans groups protested premieres. The Japanese government lodged complaints about historical distortion. Behind the scenes, the shoot was equally punishing. Filmed in Ceylon during monsoon season, the production faced floods, leeches, and collapsing sets. Lean clashed with actors and nearly abandoned the project twice. Yet out of that chaos came cinematic immortality. The Bridge on the River Kwai endures as a paradox, a masterpiece built upon misery. It revealed that obedience can be deadlier than bullets, and that the real bridge was never just steel and wood, it was the human soul, bending until it broke. Number 4. The Great Raid, 2005. Decades after the war ended, Hollywood returned to truth. The Great Raid told the story of the 600-mile rescue of Allied prisoners from the Cabanatuan camp in the Philippines in 1945. It was a mission so dangerous that even generals doubted it could succeed. Yet it did. The film chronicled the 6th Ranger Battalion, joined by Filipino guerrillas, storming the camp and freeing more than 500 captives. Directed by John Dahl, it was a rare attempt to show the Pacific War from the ground level. No fantasy, no gloss, just grit and faith. The production was meticulous. Historians worked from declassified reports. Survivors served as consultants. The crew shot in actual heat and mud to match conditions described by veterans. Yet when it premiered, it barely made headlines. Critics called it too somber, too restrained. What they missed was its quiet reverence. The film avoided hero worship and focused instead on endurance. The long silence before the assault, the shared glance between captor and captive, the thunder of freedom breaking at dawn. Behind the scenes, the studio fought against cuts demanding faster pacing. Dahl refused. He said history was not meant to be rushed. The Great Raid became a box office disappointment, but a historian's triumph. Veterans praised it for honesty. It remains one of the most accurate depictions of rescue warfare ever filmed. In its stillness, it whispers the lesson every soldier knows. Real raids do not seek glory, they seek ghosts to bring home. Number 3. 633 Squadron, 1964. It began as a modest British production and became the anthem of every airman who ever dreamed of impossible missions. 633 Squadron told of a Mosquito bomber unit tasked with destroying a Nazi rocket fuel plant hidden in a Norwegian fjord. At first glance, it looked like thrilling fiction. But behind the cinematic dogfights was a true commando spirit drawn from real raids carried out by the Royal Air Force. The story mirrored Operation Jericho and Operation Gunnerside, where precision flying and sabotage intersected. The idea of low-level attacks through narrow valleys was not invented by the writers. It was a composite of real Allied missions in occupied Europe, where success often meant certain death. Filmed with authentic RAF Mosquitoes and veteran pilots as advisors, 633 Squadron captured what cockpit warfare truly felt like. The vibration, the wind, the eerie calm before the drop. No computer effects, only roaring engines and men strapped inside glass coffins. Behind the camera, production was treacherous. Planes crashed during filming. Cameramen risked their lives filming from open bomb bays. Director Walter Grauman, a former U.S. pilot, demanded authenticity over comfort. Studio executives panicked over cost as the film's realism grew deadly. Though critics at the time dismissed it as a simple adventure, it gained cult status among air crews worldwide. George Lucas later cited it as a major influence for his Star Wars trench run sequence. Veterans claimed it was the only film that made them feel the wind of the fjords again. 633 Squadron proved that courage sometimes flies low, skimming the edge between life and memory. Number 2. Operation Crossbow, 1965. Operation Crossbow was a thriller that felt too detailed to be fiction. It told of Allied agents sent to destroy Germany's V-2 rocket program before it could strike London. While dramatized, the story came straight from classified wartime operations under the same code name. It was one of the first films to mix espionage and aerial warfare with chilling precision. The film's premise followed undercover agents posing as German engineers infiltrating secret facilities. What made it haunting was how closely it matched the real Allied intelligence missions of 1944. Those agents were often scientists and linguists who never returned. Director Michael Anderson shot it like a dossier unfolding in real time. Authentic equipment and blueprints were borrowed from the British Air Ministry. Several scenes were filmed inside decommissioned rocket bunkers. Even the explosion footage was repurposed from genuine V-weapon tests. The controversy came from the film's unflinching tone. It showed Allied mistakes, including the bombing of civilian areas based on false leads. Some politicians condemned it for damaging wartime pride. The studio received letters from families of victims who said it reopened wounds too deep to heal. Behind the scenes, the production was tense. Sophia Loren joined late in the process, creating friction with George Peppard and director Anderson. Yet despite chaos, it emerged as a masterwork of historical espionage cinema. Historians now call Operation Crossbow one of the most accurate dramatizations of Allied counterintelligence. It revealed the invisible war that decided the fate of Europe, and it reminded viewers that victory often hides beneath layers of secrecy and sorrow. Number 1. The Longest Day, 1962. It was the grandest of them all. The Longest Day united soldiers, filmmakers, and historians to retell the D-Day landings in one sweeping epic. Based on Cornelius Ryan's nonfiction book, it became the definitive portrayal of Operation Overlord and remains one of the most authentic recreations ever filmed. Shot in black and white to echo newsreel footage, the film enlisted military consultants from every Allied nation. Veterans reenacted their own landings on the beaches of Normandy. Every uniform insignia and maneuver was documented from official records. The realism was staggering. The cast was legendary: John Wayne, Richard Burton, Sean Connery, Henry Fonda. Yet no actor overshadowed the event itself. The Longest Day was filmed with military precision. Cameras rolled from dawn to dusk to match the real invasion's timing. Even tides were monitored to match historical accuracy. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Weather delays bankrupted the production. Wayne clashed with directors over dialogue. Studios feared the project would collapse under its scale. But when it premiered, the world stood silent. Critics called it not a film, but a resurrection. Veterans who had been there wept openly. They said it was the closest anyone could come to understanding that morning of thunder and sacrifice. Even decades later, military academies use it as visual reference. The Longest Day is more than a war movie. It is a cinematic monument carved from memory. It reminds every generation that freedom was purchased by those who ran into the waves, knowing they might never see the shore again. Number 4. That Didn't. The Wild Geese, 1978. It looked authentic. It sounded real. For years, many believed The Wild Geese was based on a classified British mission in Africa. It was not. Yet it felt true because it borrowed every breath of realism from the mercenaries who had lived those wars. The film followed veteran soldiers hired to rescue a deposed African leader. Richard Burton and Richard Harris led the operation on screen with grit and melancholy. Director Andrew V. McLaglen built the story from interviews with actual mercenaries who had fought in Congo and Biafra. Their slang uniforms and combat methods were meticulously copied. The illusion was so powerful that African governments protested, claiming it glorified colonial adventurism. One even banned it before release. Behind the scenes, the production was chaotic. Weapons experts walked off set after arguments over authenticity. Burton nearly collapsed from illness and alcohol. The South African authorities refused cooperation once they realized the story hinted at their own political regime. Despite being fictional, The Wild Geese bled truth. Soldiers who watched it said it mirrored the mercenary code of loyalty and loss. It was not a raid that happened, but one that could have. A story born where history and rumor trade places. Number 3. That Didn't. Force 10 from Navarone, 1970. The sequel to The Guns of Navarone carried the illusion of truth but none of the facts. Force 10 from Navarone followed a fictional Allied sabotage mission in Yugoslavia. Yet it convinced audiences it was real because of its precision. Its uniforms, dialects, and battlefield chaos matched the Balkan raids that actually occurred. Harrison Ford and Robert Shaw led a team tasked with destroying a bridge held by Nazi forces. What made it believable was the timing. In the late 1970s, newly declassified war files confirmed real missions in the same region by the British Special Operations Executive. Critics assumed the movie was one of them. It was not. Behind the scenes, production struggled in Yugoslavia's rugged terrain. Shaw died shortly after filming. Crew members worked amid blizzards using real explosives for bridge scenes. The danger was genuine even if the history was invented. Viewers remember Force 10 not for its fiction, but for how close it came to truth. It reminded audiences that every fabricated raid hides a shadow of a real one somewhere lost to classified files. Number 2. That Didn't. The Guns of Navarone. 2. The Commando's Strike at Dawn, 1942. Few realize this older war adventure predates the famous Navarone tale. The Commando's Strike at Dawn was pure invention but filmed like a mission report. Set in occupied Norway, it told of civilians forming a resistance and launching a desperate raid against German forces. It was fiction written for morale during wartime, but audiences believed it. The details were eerily convincing. The uniforms matched real Norwegian resistance units. The sabotage tactics paralleled actual British commando raids that had not yet been declassified. When those true operations became public, years later the resemblance stunned veterans. Director John Farrow insisted he had never seen military records, yet his depiction of covert landings and mountain warfare mirrored reality. Some even accused the film of leaking secrets. The British War Office investigated and quietly dropped the matter. Though entirely fictional, the Commando's Strike at Dawn captured the collective imagination of occupied Europe. It gave courage to those waiting in silence. A made-up raid that felt truer than many that happened. Number 1. That Didn't. The Guns of Navarone, Force Z, 1981. It was the final echo of an era when studios blurred the line between imagination and secret history. The Guns of Navarone. Force Z looked like another forgotten commando file brought to life. Yet it never happened. There was no Force Z, no hidden island, no real mission, but it was filmed and performed with such conviction that audiences believed otherwise. The film starred Mel Gibson and Sam Neill as Australian commandos sent to rescue survivors on a Pacific island controlled by Japanese forces. The story drew fragments from real raids by the Australian Z Special Unit, yet merged them into a wholly fictional battle. It felt official. The characters used real tactics, carried authentic weapons, and quoted lines that sounded like they came from declassified reports. Production took place in Singapore and Malaysia under tropical storms that nearly sank the entire shoot. Crew boats capsized. Actors performed in waist-deep swamps crawling through leech-infested water. The conditions were so real that soldiers who viewed it later said they could smell the fear through the screen. But truth caught up. Historians soon confirmed that the so-called Force Z mission never existed. The name itself was borrowed from a British naval group destroyed early in the war. The film had taken shards of memory and forged its own legend. Despite its fictional roots, Force Z achieved something rare. It captured the emotional truth of men thrown into hopeless missions. It showed that war films do not always need fact to find honesty. Some stories lie only to tell a deeper truth. Every Commando raid film walks a tightrope between truth and myth. Some reenact real missions that scarred nations. Others invent stories to remind us what courage feels like when it faces the impossible. Which of these struck you as most believable? Which one do you think should never be forgotten? Like, share, and comment to keep these missions alive.